Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Absolute Scenes bonus exclusive YouTube content for the beginning of the new Premier League season in mid-September, unprecedented circumstances. So if you want to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, the links are in the description because this is on YouTube, so I don't need to say it, but at Scenes Podcast and Scenes, Absolute Scenes Pod on Instagram, and then rouseroach.pod at gmail.com if you've got any stories, etc. But today we're going through what we consider to be the ultimate Premier League 20. So teams that we think deserve to be in the Premier League. We are going to do another video in a couple of days, perhaps, where we talk about the worst Premier League, the least deserving teams to have ever played in the Premier League. And then we might do an all-time top division as well. But let's crack on then, Billy, straight away with your top six then, the most deserving top six.
My top six are probably purely just, probably the same six as you, maybe in a different order. But I've got Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City, Spurs.
Right, I'm going to have to edit this now because I was trying to write them down as you were going along. So United, Chelsea,
Arsenal, Liverpool, City, Spurs.
Liverpool, City. Okay, interesting. So my top six are Man United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, Leicester.
Okay, I'm just going to,
Man United, Man City, Chelsea.
I've got it.
So why then? I'm going to just ask you, I'll just ask you one question then based on that. So why are Spurs in your top six?
So purely because they've never been relegated. So that we've just discussed off air in terms of what order we're going to do it in. So the teams below them, it'll come apparent as well. But other than City, all the teams in the top six have never been relegated from the Premier League. So it's more City have got in there because obviously they've won the Premier League 4 times. So that's how they've not snuck into the top six. But Spurs have got into the top six purely because they've never been relegated. They've had, the finished second is the highest they've finished, I think. They've had a couple of League Cups since the League Cup was introduced, since the Premier League was introduced. It was a case of, I just thought I'd put them over the other team, which is currently in 7th, purely because of what they've achieved in things like that. And then City are in there because of their successes winning the title.
So my reasoning behind putting City above Chelsea is because, am I right in saying that they've both won 4 Premier League titles?
Chelsea have won 5, I think.
Okay, well, I've got it wrong then. So Chelsea needs to go second into mine then. So sorry. So Chelsea in second, City in...
I'll double check whilst you're talking.
Arsenal have only won 3 Premier League titles, which I thought was more. But I thought it would be apt to put them in 4th place. And then Liverpool and Leicester... well, spoiler alert, I've got Blackburn in 7th place. So I've got the top 7...
Yeah,
because they've all won the Premier League. Leicester, I think, get above Blackburn because it was more of a shock story. But Blackburn bought the title a little bit more than Leicester did. Liverpool get above Leicester with 1 title, but purely because of their longevity and not being relegated. But I think, Spurs for me are 8th in mine. So I'll go on now with my next few. So we've got Blackburn in 7th, Spurs in 8th. Everton in 9th, again, not being relegated all the time. Leeds then in 10th. And we'll get, so the next sort of section, my sort of sections are kind of overlapping all the time, but this is the section of they have been relegated, but they've added something to the competition. So between 7 and 10, just to recap for me, is Blackburn, Spurs, Everton and Leeds. So you're 7 to 10, Billy?
I've got Everton, again, based on them never being relegated. And then I've gone Villa, Newcastle, and Blackburn.
Oh, Villa, Newcastle, and Blackburn. So you still haven't got Leicester in there at all.
So Leicester are then the next one down. I didn't realise they weren't in the top 10 until I've just put the line in. So I thought they were 10th, and then but
wow. So Villa in mine are they're in
lower down. Yeah.
Yeah. So Villa and Newcastle for me are not in that top 10 of Premier League teams purely because they've both been relegated fairly recently and in fairly shambolic fashion. But
I thought, in fairness, Villa. I think Villa have only been relegated once.
Yeah.
So when you look at the teams, so for example, like Leicester have been relegated 3 times, and Leicester's, when they got relegated, theirs was pretty shambolic as well. Same with and Newcastle have only gone down twice. So when you compare that to other teams which have been in the Premier League as long as these 2 teams have been, like Villa have been in there for 20, I think it's 25 of the 28 seasons. Newcastle, I think it's the same. Whereas you look at like Leicester, they went out for a longer period. So in pure longevity of them staying within the league, that's what has got them above the likes of Leicester and Blackburn. Blackburn, similar fashion. I know they've won it as Leicester have, but it's a case of when they've gone down, they haven't. It's not as though they bounced straight back up as Villa and Newcastle have done.
Villa didn't bounce straight back.
No, not straight back, but in terms of it took them a while to come back up, or they had longer periods out of the league, if that's what I'm saying. Whereas you look at Villa and Newcastle, they have, in terms of the heights that they've reached, yes, obviously Blackburn and Leicester are a lot higher because they've gone on and won the league, but Villa and Newcastle, I think, have had finishes of second.
I don't think Villa haven't finished in the top 4, I don't think. Newcastle definitely have because they've played in the Champions League. But Villa might have done actually in the 90s.
Earlier on, I think early on in the 90s. Really just to answer your question, just to go back, Chelsea have won 6 league titles in total. 5 of them,
but one of them was in the 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, one. Yeah. So you were. I was right with 5.
Okay. Right then.
So do you want me to carry on?
Go for it. Yeah. So you've given us an 11. So go down to 15
11 was
for us.
So 11 was Leicester, and then 12 Leeds, then West Ham, Southampton, and then Forest.
Forest as high as 15th.
Yeah,
So why then? So don't forget we're focusing purely on the Premier League era.
Yeah, so they had, out of the teams now, so from Leicester down, Leeds and Forest have had the highest finishes. They finished 3rd. That's the highest they finished within the Premier League era. So that in itself, whereas you look, the teams below Forest now, the next teams, the 5 teams below them, have all not reached the top 4, as it were. I don't think it was necessarily the top 4 when Forest had got there. Obviously, they've been there in the Premier League a lot shorter, and they've been relegated quite a few times. But when we only just discussed pre-recording this about obviously not including their European success, but they are one of the only other teams to have won European success. Not the Champions League, but they've won the European Cup. So I had included that within my thought processes for this. Whereas I probably, if we'd have discussed that a lot, 10 minutes before, and I probably would have knocked them down a couple of pegs. But I'd left it as it was. But yeah, it was purely because they've reached, when you look at the other teams, like West Ham's highest finish was 5th, Southampton was 6th, and they're above Forest. The rest of them have had 7th or lower. Has been their highest finish. And Leeds again, because they're obviously, I've got them a lot lower than you. I think you had them did you have them in the top? Where were Leeds in yours? The top 6?
Leeds are 10th in mine.
10th. Oh, so they're only. I thought they were a lot higher.
Yeah, so purely because of their sort of early 2000s or late 90s sort of teams with Hasselbank and Viduka, that sort of era, when they were semi-finalists in the Champions League, and they were constantly in the top 4 of say constantly, for a couple of seasons they were in the top 4.
The other reason I had Forest, because I looked at since 1992 as well, which was when the Premier League came in, is not that it's a massive indicator, but Forest have won the League Cup, or they've won a cup during that time as well. Whereas a lot of the other teams might have reached the final. Whereas you compare them to like West Ham, for example, or even like Newcastle, they haven't gone on to win anything in this period of time since the Premier League was introduced. So that's why I was like, oh, I'll give them that thing. And I think most people would want Forest in the Premier League team. It's just a case of where they rate them, sort of thing. It's going to change and stuff. But go on, give us yours.
So my 11 to 15 is Aston Villa, Southampton, Sunderland, Newcastle, and Burnley.
Ooh.
So again, Villa, I think, deserving of being in the Premier League for their longevity. Southampton, because I may be wrong in saying this, but I think they've only been relegated once.
Yeah.
Because I'd say it was about 2004, 2005, something like that. They got relegated, and then they did go all the way down to League One, but then they came back pretty quickly after a few years in the Championship. And I think I've tried to base it on if they had great players as well, and they had a few great players apart from Letitia being like a Premier League legend. You also had like Marian Pahars, Chris Marsden. What's the name?
I mean, you can just look at Liverpool. Look at Liverpool. Liverpool have poached all of their players.
Yeah, in more recent years, like
that's what I mean.
And that lot. And the way that they did come back into the Premier League, and they didn't just sort of settle for finishing 15th or something. I think they finished 7th in their first season back and qualified for the Europa League. But I don't think they actually got into the group stages. But
no.
Similar to Burnley, which I've tried to think of as well. They what I like about Burnley in recent years is they got promoted with Dyche. They got relegated with Dyche, but didn't sack him. They kept him, and then he's come back, and they've grown into a pretty settled, middle of the road kind of 10th safe Premier League team. And hopefully they continue to build on that. But they're probably the youngest in terms of Premier League seasons. But I think how many do they have now? About 6 or 7 in total.
Yeah.
It's not a lot, really. But of course, they got promoted in 2009 with Wolves, and then they've come back again a couple of times since then. Sunderland and Newcastle.
Before you carry on,
for some reason, I put Sunderland.
Spoiler, just a spoiler. I haven't got Burnley in my team. In the league, it's just because obviously my affiliation, I thought I'd put it in there in case you forget later on. Yeah, they were in my honourable mention, so I just want to apologise. I didn't want to be biased. I thought if I put them in, is it going to be a case of a bias? But I'm glad you've put them in because now I don't feel as bad for omitting them. But carry on. Sorry.
I'm going to while I'm talking, I'm going to change what I've put. So I put Sunderland above Newcastle. I don't know why.
Okay.
And in fact, I might even put Newcastle above Southampton. Thinking about it now, because even though, actually, no, I'm not going to, because Newcastle have been relegated twice. But I'm trying to work out whether or not how much finishing in the top 4 wins you, because because that would put them above Southampton. However, they've been relegated twice. But they've had a few like legendary players. Obviously, Shearer, the top goal scorer in all of Premier League history, and then you've got like players like Nobby Solano, who everybody loved. Gary Speed, Nikos Dabizas, Shay Given, lots of class players. But I've put Sunderland in there for that rivalry because I think it is one of the best derbies, which is perhaps another video we can do on the channel, Billy, in a couple of weeks. But in terms of derbies and ferociousness, that's one of the best derbies. And if you think back to when Paolo Di Canio was the manager of Sunderland, running over to on his knees in his suit, that's pretty good. So it's a pretty difficult sort of putting them in the correct order. But I'm happy for people to tell me I'm wrong in the comments. But I'll go next then for my 16 to 20. So I've got West Ham in 16th place, who you've put slightly higher. Yeah. Then we've got Wolves in 17th place. Then in 18th place, we've got Sheffield United. Then we got Sheffield Wednesday in 19th. And then we've got Nottingham Forest in 20th. So give me your 16 to 20, and then we'll debate.
Yeah. So this is the group that I think was going to have the most difference. Obviously, in terms of difference for the where the rankings were, we were probably going to end up with the same teams. But I've got Sheffield Wednesday, Sunderland, then I've gone. This is where I know you're going to be very unhappy. I've gone Bolton, Middlesbrough, West Brom.
Wow. Wow. So, wow. Okay. So we'll start off with West Brom. This is the reason why they can't be in here. First of all, this is a family channel and we don't allow swearing. Second of all, they added nothing in terms of competition to the Premier League at any point. I know that they've been in the Premier League for quite a long time, but
yeah,
we, in one season, when we came back in 2018, we surpassed any points total that they got. We surpassed any league position that they got. We qualified for a European competition. We got to an FA Cup semi-final in our first season back in the Premier League. They never did anything like that in the nearly decade that they were in the Premier League. So come back to that then, Billy.
This is the only reason I have included them, and it's just to see your reaction. Because I was down, I got to 19th, and I hadn't included Wolves, and I hadn't included Burnley, and I had West Brom, and I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to include Burnley. I'm going to put West Brom in just to see what Tom's reaction is, because I thought I managed to get the whole way down through the other team. You know, even like the likes of Middlesbrough and Bolton, like I said, those to me, you know, Middlesbrough, they managed to get to the final, didn't they, of the European competition whilst they were there. That was, you know, that's what ultimately got them in for me. They've also won, a cup and been a couple of finals since. So their cup run, not necessarily their performance in the Premier League, but their performance outside of the Premier League as well, is what managed to get them in here for me. Bolton,
Middlesbrough did have a couple of like Premier League legends, or like Juninho. What's his name? Fabrizio Ravanelli with the really grey hair. George Boateng, Paul Merson played for Borough as well. Gaza.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've had quite a few stars over the years, I suppose Bolton as well with JJ Kocher, Ivan Campo.
Yeah. There's been a few there as well. And Bolton finished, you know, they got out of the teams now in the bottom. When I was looking through the teams, I was like, well, they finished sixth, which they went into Europe and stuff. And I know since then they've gone down. But from a personal point of view, I think I spoke to you as well before. Bolton, I always remember Bolton being in the league because of that's where Chelsea won the title and stuff like that, which doesn't necessarily mean anything to someone else who will obviously omit them. And I think a lot of other people will omit them from the Premier League, but purely because I can, the highlight of my childhood with Chelsea winning the league at that point, I always associate Bolton with the Premier League as a result of that. Whereas, I've left out a lot of, we've left out a lot of big teams, but when I got to 19 and I hadn't put Wolves or Burnley in, I was like, well, I'm definitely not putting them in now, because I'll have to argue why I've put one in over the other. And then West Brom just popped up.
The reason I didn't put Bolton in, I think if I'd have had more of a objective head on, but Wolves fans don't like Bolton because there was an incident in 1995 in the playoffs. And Wolves fans were adamant that was the best team that we had in the 90s, but Bolton cheated in the playoff semi-final and got promoted. So that's why I didn't put them in, although I do appreciate the job that Sam Allardyce did in the early 2000s and with a shoestring budget. And he sort of changed the way that people think about the physical side of the game. He did a lot of things like that and tracking heart rates and things like that through games. He was quite a pioneer in some respects.
You could say he almost you put Burnley in your, you could say they've influenced Burnley because they, similar sort of, and Stoke, even, we haven't included Stoke, but in terms of physicality, Stoke. Yeah, but, Stoke, in terms of the physicality, just thinking of physical teams, Bolton, probably like the blueprint for a lot of teams coming up who haven't got the money, all the history, like when Villa or things like that have come back up, they've gone for that. Whereas Bolton have probably set the blueprint for a lot of teams to bully the big teams, rather than it's changing probably again now. Whereas they're going for this free flowing football, which sometimes works or sometimes completely capitulates. But yeah, I wanted to include Bolton purely because I know a lot of people won't. Like you said.
Just a word on Sheffield Wednesday as well. We both put them in. I don't know if you've ever been to Hillsborough, but I have a couple of times now. And you don't realise what a big club they are until you go to the ground and you think, wow, okay, 40,000 capacity stadium in the Championship and probably likely to be League One come next season. But they are an enormous club, and they're the biggest sleeping giant now that Leeds have got promoted. But and as well, a Steel City derby in the Premier League has never happened. Sheffield United were never that good during the 90s, but now the tables have turned and Sheffield United look the more stable with Chris Wilder. I think the way that they came up last year as well was, I think a couple of teams have sort of shown that you can continue on the crest of a wave if you go into the Premier League with the right mentality. And Sheffield United have done that. But I know they've only had one other season, which is perhaps there's probably more worthy teams like Bolton, I suppose, for being in the Premier League. But they were unlucky in that one season that they did have to get relegated. If you remember, it was the Carlos Tevez, Javier Mascherano debate. And had they have stayed up that season, they might have gone on to add any more. But I've put them in similar to Sunderland purely because I want to see a Steel City derby. So I'm looking at a league in the entirety, and so we've got a Sheffield derby, North East derby, North London derby, Merseyside derby. We've got Blackburn, Burnley, the Manchester derby as well. So there's a lot of competition, a lot of rivalry.
You've got a lot there in terms of, like the derbies and stuff like that. Just in terms of, Portsmouth, not that, just going off that as well, because you've got Southampton, you've obviously then got Portsmouth who were, their time in the Premier League, obviously they'd won the FA Cup there as well. They were a team, they were a team that I was looking at, but ultimately didn't come in. Fulham as well, and Palace for two other London teams, which are probably, in terms of, if you went purely on longevity, I think they're the other two of the top 20 longest serving teams in the Premier League. I think they're the two that I've omitted. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head how many you've left out. But I know when I was looking down, I circled those two to make, because I knew then if you went for the longest serving teams, Fulham and Palace would be in there. Wolves, I've already mentioned. Ipswich were another team because they're the only other team since that I've had European success, an English team that's had European success in recent years. I think they won like the Intertoto Cup or something like that, which, whether you count that as European success, but when I was looking through things like since the introduction of the Premier League and stuff, but and then the only other team that I had written down was Wigan, but again, that was just because I remember them. I think they were like the real like minnows.
Yeah, they were.
I can really remember. That did well, like they did well in their first season, sort of thing. But that, I think quite a few of them might be spoken about on another day.
Yeah, so that's our picks for our top 20s. Let us know yours in the comments section down below, and then we'll be back tomorrow with the worst 20 teams to have ever played in the Premier League. Join us then. Subscribe to the channel. Check out the podcast as well on Spotify, iTunes, Acast, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're supposed to get a podcast from nowadays. And we'll see you in the future. Bye.